Hello, I'm Bruce DePoy. Coming up today on News Talk, Donald Trump and Jeb Bush go at it over 9/11. The former Florida governor expressing anger at the real estate mogul's comments about who was president the day America was attacked. Also, Hillary on the hot seat. The former Secretary of State preparing to be grilled by the panel investigating the attack on the U.S. consulate in Libya, violence that left 4 American diplomats dead. How the showdown on Capitol Hill could impact the 2016 campaign. Then, taking one on the chin. Washington falls to the Jets. Yet another second-half lead blown. And new questions about whether the quarterback and the coach are in danger of being replaced.
From News Channel 8, this is News Talk with Bruce DePoy.
Hi and welcome. It is great to have you with us today. We begin the new week with a full plate of really interesting developments in the world of politics. From Hillary Clinton's upcoming testimony on Capitol Hill to the rules changes that Donald Trump and Ben Carson were able to muscle into the next debate. Up first, though, the increasingly bitter feud between Donald Trump and Jeb Bush. It all began after Trump criticized Jeb's brother, former President George W. Bush, for failing to prevent the attacks of September 11th. We begin our coverage with correspondent Jonathan Carl.
He was once considered the candidate to beat, but Jeb Bush is down in the polls, collecting less cash and lashing out at Donald Trump, suggesting he is not fit to be commander-in-chief.
Mr. Trump talks about things that as though he's still on The Apprentice. He's not taking the responsibility, the possibility of being President of the United States really seriously.
This after Trump went after Jeb's brother George W. Bush, suggesting he bears responsibility for 9/11.
When you talk about George Bush, I mean, say what you want, the World Trade Center came down during his time. If you look at Sandy Hook,
you can't blame George Bush for that.
He was president, okay? Don't blame him or don't blame him, but he was president.
A charge Trump didn't back down from on Sunday.
Jeb said, we were safe with my brother. We were safe. Well, the World Trade Center just fell down. Now, am I trying to blame him? I'm not blaming anybody. But the World Trade Center came down.
Trump even suggested the attack never would have happened on his watch because the hijackers wouldn't have made it into the country if he had been president.
What would you have done?
I believe that if I were running things, I doubt those families would have, I doubt that those people would have been in the country.
Over the weekend, Bush's campaign released a new video ridiculing Trump on national security.
I'm used to, dealing with killers, people that go, Let me tell you, I'm a really smart guy.
In the latest national poll, Jeb Bush is trailing not just Trump, but Carson, Cruz, and Rubio, too. Even when it comes to fundraising, which was thought to be Bush's biggest advantage, he was outraised last quarter by the soft-spoken political newcomer Dr. Ben Carson, who declined to criticize Trump's remarks to George on This Week.
What do you make of that?
I would probably ask him what he meant by that. I seriously doubt that he's saying that George W. Bush is to blame for it.
Jonathan Carl reporting for us there, and joining us now here, Professor Stephen Farnsworth. He teaches political science at the University of Mary Washington. He's the co-author of The Global President. So much going on. It's really great to have you here as we get the new week launched. Thanks very much for your time.
Glad to be here.
Let me put to you the question that George Stephanopoulos just put to Dr. Ben Carson. With this question that Donald Trump raises, and that is clearly pricked a nerve with Jeb Bush for very understandable personal and political reasons. What do you make of that?
Well, I think it's clear that the Trump campaign really sees Jeb Bush as the main rival to be dispensed with. And the Trump campaign has been pretty effective, I think, at getting under Jeb Bush's skin, not only in this particular instance, but a number of other earlier comments. It raises a lot of questions in the minds of Trump's suitability to be president, to be sure, among some Republicans. But above all, what it also does is really put the burden of challenging the Bush presidency on Jeb Bush. Remember, Jeb Bush's argument originally was that he was going to be a different Bush, a different kind of Bush. And every time he has to go back and talk about the very unpopular years of George W. Bush, every time he has to talk about Iraq or Afghanistan or 9/11 or the weapons of mass destruction, is a problem for the Bush campaign. And as you know from the poll numbers, the Bush campaign already has more problems than it can handle.
People run for office invoking Ronald Reagan. I've heard few Republicans run for office in the years since George W. Bush was president saying, I want to be George W. Bush's third term.
That's absolutely true. You're looking at a colossal expense with respect to the war in Afghanistan and Iraq for relatively modest return if you look at the Bush years. You also are looking at a situation where when he left office, the approval ratings were extraordinarily low, well under 25% for the Bush presidency. And that's really, really extraordinary. That's Nixon at Watergate kind of levels of unpopularity. And so the Republicans, quite wisely, in the years since Bush's end of office, have tried to move beyond Bush, whether it was McCain, whether it was Romney, whether it was the 2016 field. The only person who can plausibly argue that he's a successor to Bush, George W. Bush, is Jeb Bush, and he's been very careful to try to avoid doing that, although Trump brings George W. Bush back into the conversation over and over again.
What is it about the invoking of 9/11 and who was president on the day America suffered its worst attack since Pearl Harbor? What is it about that is so incendiary, inflammatory, etc.?
Well, I think the thing to remember about 9/11, it's now been 14 years, but at that moment, America was really together. This country had been attacked, and we came together in a way that is extraordinary for the very divisive politics that existed before and after 9/11. And the environment of 9/11, the conversation about 9/11, has always been somewhat understated because of the lives lost and because of that moment of unity, which we rarely have in America. The reality of the investigations that have followed raise questions about what Bush should have responded to some of the national security briefings and things like that. But I think ultimately where Trump is going is where no mainstream political figure has gone in all those 14 years. The question of whether somehow Bush should be responsible because he was in charge at the time, that raises a lot of questions that have not been raised previously. Trump, to the astonishment of just about everybody who watches politics, is able to touch one-third rail of politics after another, and somehow his poll numbers remain static. He has not suffered from one bizarre comment after another, whether it was John McCain or George W. Bush. Trump breaks all the rules of the things you should and shouldn't say if you plan on being elected in this country.
And we've had months of predictions from people who've been around politics a while that the date stamp, the expiration date stamp on the Donald Trump surge in the polls is surely upon us, or it will be here soon, and he has defied those predictions each and every time he continues to lead the field. Professor Farnsworth, tee up for us, if you would, what will be, without question, a huge drama in Washington this week as former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton testifies before the House Select Committee investigating the deaths at the consulate in Benghazi.
Yeah. For Republicans, this has been a very self-destructive topic lately. The idea that Hillary Clinton was not an effective Secretary of State with respect to the performance of the Benghazi situation, the emails that have a controversy that's arisen subsequently, these are topics that Republicans thought would be very useful for undermining Clinton's campaign. The problem is,
beginning the day of the attack, there was pressure on Mitt Romney as the embers were burning at that building. There was pressure from Republican activist types on Mitt Romney to get out there and seize this moment.
Right. And the Republicans, most of the time, have been pretty careful to say that this is about finding out what happened in Benghazi rather than saying this is about undermining Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign. Unfortunately, in the last couple of weeks, the designated leader, the majority leader for the Republicans, who we had thought was going to be the next speaker, stepped into this maelstrom by doing the one thing you should never do in politics, and that's being explicit about how you're politicizing something. And so when McCarthy made that statement, it gave the Clintons the opportunity to do what they do best. Clintons are not good on defense, they are very good on offense. And then there have been some other comments, and the head of the Benghazi committee has asked other Republicans, if they're not on the committee, to just be quiet about Benghazi, because every time someone speaks up about Benghazi, talks about it in a political context, it undermines any of the claims that there is some substantive thing going on here, rather than another one of the he said, she said, Democratic and Republican food fights that have marked Washington since we first heard of the Clintons more than 20 years ago.
So there will be enormous focus on the tone and substance of the questions that are directed from members of the committee at former Secretary of State Clinton. But the stakes for her are huge. Some have said this is as big as a debate. And given the relative weakness of the Democratic field, in the sense that she is still kind of the favorite and the most likely to prevail when all is said and done, How would you characterize the stakes leading into this encounter?
I think it's fair to think of it as a political debate. I think that the stakes are as high as they were last week when Hillary Clinton appeared on the stage with Bernie Sanders. Now she will face a combative panel of Republicans, and no doubt about it, how well or how poorly she does will have a significant impact on how presidential she is seen by voters going forward. This, by the way, is yet another way that Donald Trump is undermining the Republican brand. When you say that George W. Bush should bear some responsibility for 9/11 because he was president at the time, and the Republicans say that he shouldn't, well, then Hillary Clinton is in the same position. She was Secretary of State when the Benghazi situation happened. And if Bush is excused for 9/11 just because he was, he shouldn't be blamed just because he was there, then how exactly can the Republicans make the case that Hillary Clinton should be blamed because she was there? Everything Donald Trump has said has really complicated the Republican message, whether it's immigration, whether it's balanced budgets, fiscal responsibility, openness to working class concerns. The Trump message over and over again has undermined a Republican message that would be more inclusive and more likely to lead to success in 2016.
Does she get hammered on the email scandal in this appearance before the committee?
Absolutely. This is the last major attempt that the Republicans are going to have to tar Hillary Clinton with this before we get to the presidential general election debates, almost a year from now. So this is your last swing at the plate, if you will, to weaken Hillary Clinton as a potential nominee. No doubt about it, the Republicans would prefer to run against Bernie Sanders. But if Hillary Clinton does well in the hearing this week, odds are they won't be running against Bernie Sanders.
And odds are Joe Biden's rationale for having to leap into the contest as a savior diminishes that much more.
I think that's true. I think that Biden is always in the on-deck circle. Even if he says no now, that doesn't mean no forever. And so I think that you're looking at a situation where if Hillary Clinton does well on Thursday, like she did well in the debates last week, that undermines the argument that Biden needs to come in and be a savior. If Hillary stumbles, though, in a future debate, or there are new revelations about Benghazi or something else that creates a problem for Hillary Clinton, well, there's still Joe Biden rested and ready to step in, because there's no doubt about it. The Democratic establishment does not want Bernie Sanders to be the nominee, and Biden is the alternative if Hillary stumbles.
Talking with University of Mary Washington political science professor and author Stephen Farnsworth. We'll take a quick break here, but we are back with more right after this.